What kind of man writes a letter to a grieving family detailing how he cooked and ate their 10-year-old daughter as if it were a recipe shared over coffee? Albert Fish, known as the Brooklyn Vampire, was a figure so depraved that his crimes shocked 1920s America to its core. If this horrifying paradox grabs you, hit that subscribe button like this video and share it to uncover the twisted tale of one of history's most shocking figures. Leave a comment. Could you imagine a neighbor like Fish hiding such darkness? Albert Hamilton Fish was born on May 19, 1870 in Washington, D.C., under the name Hamilton Howard. Fish, a name he later changed to honor a dead sibling. To the world, he was a frail, elderly-looking man with a soft voice and a grandfatherly demeanor often seen in tattered suits, blending into the gritty streets of New York City. Yet beneath this unassuming exterior lurked a predator whose crimes, murder, cannibalism, and unspeakable acts against children would earn him nicknames like the Gray Man and the Werewolf of Wisteria. His ability to pass as harmless made him all the more terrifying, a wolf in sheep's clothing, prowling America's urban underbelly. Fish's early life was a breeding ground for darkness. Orphaned at 5 after his father's death, he was sent to St. John's Orphanage, where he endured brutal beatings and witnessed acts of cruelty that shaped his psyche. By age 7, he was engaging in self-harm, a precursor to the masochistic tendencies that defined his later years. As a young adult, he drifted through odd jobs, painter-handyman, marrying in 1898 and fathering 6 children. To his family, he was a quiet, if eccentric, provider. But by the 1910s, his compulsions turned deadly, targeting society's most vulnerable children and the destitute. What's shocking about Fish isn't just his crimes, but their sheer audacity. He confessed to over 100 acts of molestation and at least 15 murders, though only a handful were confirmed. His most infamous crime, the 1928 murder of 10-year-old Grace Budd, haunted the nation. Fish lured Grace from her Manhattan home under the guise of a job offer for her brother, then took her to an abandoned house in Westchester, where he committed atrocities too horrific to detail fully. 6 years later, he sent a letter to the Budd family describing the act in grotesque detail, including how he roasted and ate her. This letter, meant to taunt, became the key to his capture. Modern psychology offers chilling insights into Fish's mind. Experts diagnose him with a mix of sadism, masochism, and cannibalistic paraphilia rooted in childhood trauma and a warped religious obsession. He claimed divine voices guided his actions, a delusion that justified his horrors. Unlike charismatic killers, Fish's ordinariness, his stooped posture, watery eyes, made him invisible. He exploited the chaos of 1920s America, a time of economic strife and lax policing, to prey unnoticed. His crimes weren't just acts of violence. They were rituals meticulously planned and savored. The emotional toll on his victims' families was devastating. Grace Budd's parents, Delia and Albert Sr., never recovered from the loss, their lives shattered by the letter that confirmed their daughter's fate. Society's failure to protect its most vulnerable fueled Fish's spree, a grim reflection of the era's neglect. As we unravel his story, one question lingers. How did a man so outwardly frail become a monster so bold? Stay tuned for the chilling details of his early crimes and the societal blind spots that let him roam free. But first, comment below. What shocks you most about Fish's ability to hide in plain sight? Like and share to spread this dark history. The seeds of depravity. How does a child raised in the shadow of cruelty grow into a monster who feasts on innocence and revels in his own depravity? Albert Fish's early years were a crucible of trauma that forged the Brooklyn Vampire, a man whose twisted desires would horrify 1920s America. If this chilling glimpse into the making of a killer hooks you, smash that subscribe button like this video and share it to spread the word about one of history's most grotesque figures. Drop a comment on what kind of childhood could twist someone into a predator. Like Fish, Albert Fish's descent began in the grim confines of St. John's Orphanage in Washington, D.C., where he landed at age 5 after his father's death in 1875. The orphanage was a brutal place where beatings were routine and children were left to fend for themselves. Young Albert, already sensitive and small for his age, endured relentless abuse from both staff and older boys. These punishments, often delivered with a paddle or whip, sparked a disturbing reaction in Fish. He began to associate pain with pleasure. By age 7, he was engaging in self-harm, piercing himself with needles, and reveling in the sensation. This masochistic streak, later coupled with sadism, became the foundation of his monstrous acts. By his teens, Fish was adrift in a world that offered little kindness. After leaving the orphanage at 12, he worked odd jobs, errand boy painter, while grappling with urges he barely understood. In 1882, at age 12, he began a relationship with an older boy who introduced him to perverse acts, including coprophagia and voyeurism. These experiences, far from repulsing him, deepened his fascination with taboo behaviors. Fish later claimed these early encounters awakened something in him, a dark seed that grew unchecked. Modern psychologists point to this as a critical moment where trauma and exposure to deviance shaped his paraphilias, setting him on a path toward violence. As a young adult, Fish moved to New York City in the 1890s, a bustling metropolis teeming with opportunity and anonymity. He married Anna Mary Hoffman in 1898, and they had 6 children, creating a facade of normalcy. To his family, he was a quiet, if eccentric, provider, painting houses by day and attending church on Sundays. But beneath this mask, his compulsions were simmering. By the early 1900s, he began molesting children, targeting boys in orphanages and slums places where complaints were ignored. His crimes escalated in 1910 when he committed his first confirmed murder, a young boy in Wilmington, Delaware. The act, involving mutilation and cannibalism, marked Fish's transition from predator to killer. What's shocking about Fish's early crimes is how easily he evaded suspicion. The 1920s were a time of social upheaval, with the Great War's aftermath and Prohibition fueling urban chaos. Police were overwhelmed, and missing children from poor neighborhoods often went unnoticed. Fish exploited this, targeting society's margins, runaways, immigrants, and the destitute. His grandfatherly appearance, stooped, gray-haired with a gentle smile, disarmed his victims. He'd offer candy money or a kind word, luring children to abandoned buildings or rural hideouts. One chilling case involved a 9-year-old boy in 1919 whose body was found in a basement, partially consumed. Police attributed it to a random transient, never suspecting the quiet painter living nearby. Fish's rituals were as disturbing as his crimes. He claimed to hear divine voices rooted in his obsessive religiosity, urging him to inflict pain. He would insert needles into his body, some found lodged in his pelvis, during later X-rays as a form of self-punishment, believing it pleased God. This blend of masochism and sadism made his attacks uniquely horrific. Victims were not just killed, but tortured, their suffering a perverse sacrament. Modern criminologists suggest Fish's behavior aligns with a rare form of sadomasochistic paraphilia, where pain inflicted on himself or others was his only path to gratification. The emotional toll on his victims' families was heartbreaking. Parents of missing children, like those in New York's tenements, often lacked the resources to demand justice. The era's social hierarchy meant poor families' cries went unheard, allowing Fish to operate unchecked. His own family, however, saw glimpses of his oddity. His children recalled his strange habits, staring into space, muttering about sacrifices, but dismissed them as quirks. His wife Anna left him in 1917 for another man, leaving Fish to raise their children alone, which only deepened his isolation and dissent. As Fish's crimes grew bolder, so did his recklessness. By the 1920s, he was no longer content with fleeting attacks. He sought to memorialize his horrors, a compulsion that would lead to his most infamous act. How long could a man so depraved hide in plain sight? In the next part, we'll dive into the chilling murder of Grace Budd and the letter that shocked the world. But first, let's hear from you. Comment below. What shocks you most about how Fish's childhood shaped his crimes? Like and share to help us uncover more dark history. The horror of Grace Budd and the infamous letter. How does a man commit an act so vile that it scars a family for generations, then taunts them with a letter detailing the unspeakable? In 1928, Albert Fish, the Brooklyn vampire, committed his most infamous crime, the murder and cannibalism of 10-year-old Grace Budd, followed by a chilling letter to her parents that shocked America. If this horrifying chapter hooks you, smash that subscribe button like this video and share it to spread the tale of one of history's most depraved killers. Drop a comment. Could you stomach reading a letter like the one Fish sent by the late 1920s? Albert Fish was a seasoned predator, his crimes honed over decades of escalating depravity. At 58, he was a frail-looking figure with gray hair and a meek demeanor blending seamlessly into New York City's crowded streets. His life as a house painter and father of 6 gave him an air of respectability, but his mind was a cauldron of perverse fantasies fueled by religious delusions and a hunger for pain. The murder of Grace Budd would cement his infamy, not just for its brutality, but for the audacity of his confession mailed directly to the family he'd shattered. On May 28, 1928, Fish answered a classified ad placed by Edward Budd, an 18-year-old looking for work. Posing as Frank Howard, a kindly farmer, Fish visited the Budd family's Manhattan tenement, claiming to offer Edward a job on his Long Island farm. The family parents, Albert Sr., and Delia and their children, including 10-year-old Grace, welcomed the soft-spoken man into their home. Fish's gentle smile and promises of steady pay disarmed them. During the visit, he shifted his focus to Grace, a bright-eyed girl with a trusting nature. He offered to take her to a children's party at his sister's house, promising to return her by evening. Delia hesitated, but Albert Sr., desperate for work, agreed. Grace left with Fish clutching his hand, never to return. Fish took Grace to an abandoned house in Westchester, called Wisteria Cottage, a dilapidated structure hidden by overgrown trees. There, in a scene too horrific to fully describe, he strangled her, dismembered her body, and consumed parts of it over several days. He later confessed to cooking her in a stew with carrots and onions, savoring the act as a twisted ritual. The brutality wasn't impulsive. It was meticulous, a performance driven by his sadomasochistic urges. Fish claimed divine voices sanctioned the act, a delusion that made his crimes feel sacred to him. The Budd family's anguish was unimaginable. When Grace didn't return, they alerted police, but 1920s, New York was ill-equipped to handle missing children from working-class families. The case went cold, with investigators dismissing it as a runaway incident. For 6 years, Delia and Albert Sr. clung to hope, their lives unraveling under the weight of grief. Then, in November 1934, a letter arrived handwritten in Fish's spidery script. Addressed to Delia, it began innocently recounting his visit before plunging into horror. Fish described killing Grace, cooking her and eating her, detailing the process with grotesque pride. "It took me 9 days to eat her entirely," he wrote, claiming he hadn't violated her sexually, as if that offered solace. The letter, meant to taunt, was a window into a mind devoid of empathy. The emotional toll on the Budds was catastrophic. Delia collapsed, reading the letter, while Albert Sr. vowed vengeance. The letter's specificity, mentioning details only the killer would know, spurred police to action. Detective William King, a tenacious investigator, traced the stationery to a boarding house in Manhattan where Fish had stayed. This clue, born of Fish's own arrogance, would lead to his capture, but not before exposing the depth of his depravity. The letter wasn't just evidence. It was a psychological weapon amplifying the family's pain and shocking a nation unaccustomed to such brazen evil. Modern criminologists view the letter as a hallmark of Fish's pathology. Unlike most serial killers who hide their crimes, Fish craved acknowledgement, a trait linked to his masochistic need for punishment. His religious obsession, rooted in a warped interpretation of biblical sacrifice, framed his acts as divine offerings. The letter, sent 6 years after the crime, suggests he wanted to be caught, a subconscious desire to end his spree. Yet his ability to evade justice for so long highlights the era's failings. Police lacked forensic tools, and society ignored the vulnerable, allowing Fish to prey unchecked. The Grace Budd case wasn't Fish's only crime during this period. Between 1928 and 1934, he killed at least 2 other children, including 4-year-old Billy Gaffney, whose body was never found. Each murder followed a similar pattern, luring, killing, and consuming, with Fish reveling in the aftermath. His ability to live a double life, painting houses by day, attending church with his children, made him invisible. But the letter to the Budds was his fatal mistake. How close would authorities come to catching the Brooklyn vampire, and what horrors would they uncover? In the next part, we'll explore the manhunt that followed, and the chilling truths it revealed. But first, comment below. What shocks you most about Fish's letter to the Budds? Like and share to spread this dark history. The manhunt and the monster's unmasking. How does a predator who for decades slipped through society's cracks finally face the noose when his own arrogance betrays him? In 1934, Albert Fish, the Brooklyn vampire, sent a letter so vile it galvanized a city to hunt him down, exposing a trail of horrors that would haunt America. If this relentless pursuit of a monster hooks you, smash that subscribe button, like this video, and share it to spread the tale of one of history's most depraved killers. Drop a comment. Could you imagine hunting a predator like Fish in the chaos of 1930s New York? By November 1934, the letter Albert Fish sent to the Budd family detailing the murder and cannibalism of their 10-year-old daughter Grace had ignited a firestorm. The New York City police, long criticized for neglecting missing children, cases faced immense pressure to catch the killer. Detective William King, a dogged investigator with a reputation for tenacity, took the lead. The letter, written in Fish's distinctive scrawl, was the first solid clue in the 6-year-old Grace Budd case. Its grotesque details describing how Fish cooked and ate Grace were not just evidence, but a taunt, a challenge to a system that had failed to stop him. King's investigation zeroed in on the letter's stationery, a critical oversight by Fish. The envelope bore a faint emblem from the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association, traced to a boarding house on East 52nd Street. King staked out the location, interviewing residents and tracking leads. On December 13, 1934, Fish returned to the boarding house to collect a check, his frail frame and gray suit unremarkable among the tenants. King recognized him instantly, arresting the 64-year-old man who seemed more like a tired grandfather than a monster. When searched, Fish carried a razor, a knife, and a saw, tools of his trade, hidden in his coat. The arrest was just the beginning. Under interrogation, Fish's facade crumbled, and he began confessing with chilling calmness. He confirmed Grace Budd's murder, describing the act in Wisteria Cottage with a detachment that stunned detectives. But Grace was only the tip of the iceberg. Fish claimed responsibility for over 100 acts of molestation and at least 15 murders, though only a handful could be verified. Among them was 4-year-old Billy Gaffney, abducted in 1927 from a Brooklyn tenement. Fish recounted luring Billy to an abandoned house, where he tortured, killed, and consumed him, later disposing of the remains in a river. The confession, delivered with a faint smile, left hardened officers reeling. What's shocking about Fish's capture wasn't just the scope of his crimes, but how long he'd evaded justice. The 1920s and 1930s were a perfect storm for predators like Fish. Urban overcrowding, economic hardship from the Great Depression, and lax policing created a haven for crime. Missing children from poor neighborhoods were often dismissed as runaways, and forensic science was rudimentary. Fish exploited this, targeting society's most vulnerable orphans, immigrants, and street kids, knowing their disappearances would draw little attention. His grandfatherly appearance, often described as kindly by neighbors, was his greatest asset, disarming both victims and authorities. The emotional toll on the victims' families was heart-wrenching. Grace Budd's parents, Delia and Albert Sr., were summoned to identify Fish. Delia's screams echoed through the precinct when she saw the man who'd taken her daughter. Billy Gaffney's mother, already broken by years of uncertainty, collapsed upon hearing Fish's confession. These families, already struggling in New York's tenements, were left with nothing but grief and a system that had failed them. The public learning of the case through sensational newspaper headlines was horrified, yet riveted, dubbing Fish the Brooklyn Vampire and Werewolf of Wisteria for his monstrous acts. Fish's confessions revealed a mind warped by obsession. He spoke of divine voices claiming God ordained his crimes as sacrifices. His masochistic rituals, inserting needles into his body, whipping himself, were intertwined with his sadistic attacks, creating a cycle of pain he both inflicted and craved. Modern psychologists analyzing his case suggest Fish suffered from a rare combination of paraphilias, including pedophilia, sadomasochism, and cannibalism, rooted in childhood trauma and unchecked mental illness. Unlike organized killers who planned meticulously, Fish's crimes were chaotic, driven by impulse, yet chillingly deliberate in their execution. The investigation uncovered chilling details. Police searched Wisteria Cottage, finding traces of blood and bone fragments, though decomposition obscured much evidence. Fish's boarding house room revealed a cache of needles and knives, corroborating his self-harm claims. X-rays later showed 29 needles embedded in his pelvis, a testament to his masochistic obsession. These discoveries painted a picture not just of a killer, but of a man consumed by his own darkness, a figure who seemed to revel in his infamy. As Fish sat in a cell, the question loomed: what would justice look like for a man whose crimes defied comprehension? In the next part, we'll explore his trial, the public's reaction, and the psychological unraveling of the Brooklyn Vampire. But first, let's hear from you. Comment below. What shocks you most about how Fish was finally caught? Like and share to help us bring more dark history to light. The trial and the public's horror. What happens when a courtroom becomes a stage for a monster's confessions, revealing horrors that make even the hardest hearts recoil into 1935. Albert Fish, the Brooklyn Vampire, faced trial for the murder of Grace Budd. His crimes laid bare in a spectacle that shocked Depression-era America. If this chilling reckoning hooks you, smash that subscribe button like this video and share it to spread the tale of one of history's most depraved killers. Drop a comment on what would justice look like for a predator like Fish. The trial of Albert Fish began on March 11, 1935 in White Plains, New York, a small courthouse packed with journalists, grieving families, and a public both horrified and morbidly fascinated. Fish, now 64, stood in the dock, his frail frame and watery eyes belying the monster within. The prosecution, led by Elbert Gallagher, presented a case centered on the murder of 10-year-old Grace Budd, though Fish's confessions had revealed a far wider trail of atrocities. The courtroom buzzed with tension as details of his cannibalism, mutilation, and taunting letter to the Budd family were read aloud, each word a dagger to the hearts of those present. The evidence was overwhelming. Detective William King testified about tracing Fish's letter, detailing the arrest at the Manhattan boarding house. Grace's parents, Delia and Albert Sr., took the stand, their voices trembling as they recounted the day Fish, posing as Frank Howard, took their daughter. Delia's sobs filled the room as she described receiving the letter in 1934, its grotesque details confirming Grace's fate. Other witnesses, including police who searched Wisteria Cottage, described finding traces of blood and bone fragments corroborating Fish's confession. The prosecution also introduced X-rays showing 29 needles embedded in Fish's pelvis, a shocking testament to his masochistic rituals. Fish's defense, led by James Dempsey, argued insanity, claiming his religious delusions and childhood trauma rendered him incapable of understanding his actions. Fish himself fueled this narrative, ranting about divine voices that commanded him to kill as a form of sacrifice. He spoke with eerie calm, describing his crimes as if recounting a mundane day at work. At one point he claimed to have sinned, but insisted he never harmed Grace sexually, a statement that enraged the gallery. Psychiatrists for the defense testified that Fish suffered from severe mental illness, citing his sadomasochistic paraphilias and cannibalistic urges as evidence of psychosis. The prosecution countered with a chilling argument Fish was not mad, but methodical. His ability to live a double life, raising 6 children, holding jobs, and evading capture for decades, proved he was in control. Lead psychiatrist Frederick Vertum, a prosecution witness, described Fish as a human anomaly, driven by a need to inflict and receive pain, yet fully aware of his actions. Vertum's testimony painted Fish not as a victim of madness, but as a predator who chose his path, a view that resonated with a jury desperate for justice. The emotional toll on the courtroom was palpable. Grace Budd's family sat through every session their grief, a silent indictment of a society that failed to protect their daughter. Reporters described Delia Budd clutching a photograph of Grace, tears streaming as Fish's confessions were read. The public following the trial through sensational headlines in papers like the New York Daily News was both repulsed and riveted. Nicknames like Brooklyn Vampire and Gray Man fueled a media frenzy, with tabloids printing lurid details of Fish's cannibalism and self-harm. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, some calling for his execution, others morbidly curious about the man who looked like a kindly grandfather. The societal backdrop of 1935 amplified the trial's impact. The Great Depression had left America reeling, with families like the Budds struggling to survive in New York's tenements. Fish's crimes exposed the era's vulnerabilities: underfunded police, ignored missing persons cases, and a lack of mental health resources. His ability to target children from poor neighborhoods highlighted a grim truth: society's most vulnerable were easy prey. The trial also sparked debates about insanity defenses, with many arguing that Fish's lucidity in planning his crimes disqualified him from such a plea. Fish's behavior during the trial was a spectacle in itself. He would stare blankly, then burst into rants about biblical atonement, unsettling even the judge. One chilling moment came when he smiled while describing Billy Gaffney's murder, prompting gasps from the gallery. Modern criminologists see this as a mix of narcissism and masochism. Fish craved the attention, even if it meant his downfall. His confessions, detailing at least 15 murders and countless molestations, painted a picture of a man who saw his victims as objects for his twisted rituals, not as human beings. On March 22, 1935, after a 10-day trial, the jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding Fish guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to death in the electric chair, a verdict met with cheers from the crowd, but hollow relief for the Budds. As Fish was led away, one question lingered. What drove a man to such depths, and what would his execution reveal? In the next part, we'll explore Fish's final days, his chilling Ask One confessions, and the legacy he left behind. But first, let's hear from you. Comment below. What shocks you most about Fish's trial and his chilling demeanor? Like and share to help us bring more dark history to light. The Final Days and the Monster's Mind, Unraveled. What does a man say in his final days when he knows the electric chair awaits and his crimes have branded him a monster in the eyes of a nation? In 1935, Albert Fish, the Brooklyn vampire, sat in a cell at Sing Sing prison, his confessions peeling back layers of a mind so twisted it defied comprehension. If this chilling glimpse into a killer's final moments hooks you, smash that subscribe button like this video and share it to spread the tale of one of history's most depraved figures. Drop a comment. Could you face a man like Fish in his final hours? After his conviction on March 22, 1935 for the murder of 10-year-old Grace Budd, Albert Fish was sentenced to die in the electric chair. Transferred to Sing Sing prison in Ossining, New York, he awaited execution, his frail 65-year-old frame, a stark contrast to the horrors he'd inflicted. The 9 months between his trial and execution on January 16, 1936, revealed a man unrepentant, even gleeful, as he recounted his crimes with a chilling mix of pride and detachment. His confessions, shared with psychiatrists and guards, painted a portrait of a mind consumed by darkness, leaving a nation to grapple with the question, what makes a man like Fish in his cell? Fish was a paradox. He spent hours writing letters, some to his children, others to himself, filled with ramblings about sin and salvation. He spoke of divine voices claiming God had chosen him to sacrifice children, a delusion rooted in his obsessive religiosity. To psychiatrists like Frederick Wertham, who visited him, Fish's behavior was a mix of narcissism and masochism. He described inserting needles into his body, over 29 were found in his pelvis, via X-ray as a form of atonement. Yet he took perverse joy in recounting his murders. One guard recalled Fish smiling as he described cooking Grace Budd, as if savoring a fond memory. Fish's confessions grew more horrifying. He admitted to at least 15 murders, including 4-year-old Billy Gaffney in 1927 and 12-year-old Frances McDonnell in 1934, both killed and partially consumed. He claimed over 100 molestations targeting children in orphanages, slums, and rural areas across 23 states. His methods were consistent, luring victims with candy or money, then subjecting them to torture and cannibalism in secluded locations. The details were so gruesome that some interrogators refused to continue, sickened by his calm delivery. Fish's lack of remorse was chilling. He saw his victims as objects, their suffering a means to satisfy his twisted desires. The emotional toll on the victims' families was unbearable. Grace Budd's parents, Delia and Albert Sr., were informed of Fish's confessions, each detail a fresh wound. Delia, already broken by the 1934 letter, refused to attend the execution, unable to face the man who'd destroyed her daughter. Billy Gaffney's mother, Elizabeth, learned of her son's fate through Fish's confessions, her grief compounded by years of uncertainty. These families, struggling in the depths of the Great Depression, received no support from a society quick to sensationalize their pain. Newspaper headlines screamed of the Brooklyn vampire turning their tragedy into tabloid fodder. Fish's final days revealed the depth of his psychological torment. Psychiatrists, including Wertham, diagnosed him with a rare combination of paraphilias, sadism, masochism, pedophilia, and cannibalism rooted in his childhood at St. John's Orphanage, where abuse awakened his fascination with pain. His religious delusions, blending biblical imagery with perverse acts, framed his crimes as divine missions. Yet Fish was no raving lunatic. He was lucid, calculating, and aware of his actions. Wertham noted that Fish's greatest thrill was the anticipation of his execution, a final act of masochistic fulfillment. When told of the electric chair, Fish reportedly said, "What a thrill that will be," a statement that chilled even seasoned prison staff. The public's reaction was a mix of horror and fascination. The 1930s were a time of economic despair, with Americans clinging to sensational stories as a distraction. Fish's case dominated headlines with papers like the New York Daily Mirror, printing lurid details of his cannibalism and self-harm. Crowds gathered outside Sing Sing, some demanding his death, others curious to glimpse the gray man. The case sparked debates about mental illness and the death penalty, with some arguing Fish's insanity warranted mercy, while others saw him as evil incarnate. The lack of mental health resources in the era meant Fish's condition went untreated, a failure that allowed his spree to flourish. On January 16, 1936, Fish walked to the electric chair, reportedly unafraid. Legend claims the execution was delayed because the needles in his body caused a short circuit, though this is likely apocryphal. His death was swift ending a life that had left countless scars, but his story was far from over. What legacy would the Brooklyn vampire leave, and how would his crimes reshape society's view of monsters? In the next part, we'll explore the aftermath, the cultural impact, and the enduring mysteries of Fish's life. But first, let's hear from you. Comment below. What shocks you most about Fish's lack of remorse in his final days? Like and share to help us bring more dark history to light. The legacy of the Brooklyn vampire. What kind of shadow does a monster cast when his crimes expose the darkest corners of human nature and a society's failures? Albert Fish. The Brooklyn vampire met his end in 1936, but his legacy of horror reshaped America's understanding of evil, leaving scars that linger in the cultural psyche. If this chilling finale hooks you, smash that subscribe button like this video and share it to spread the tale of one of history's most depraved killers. Drop a comment. What does Fish's story teach us about the monsters hiding among us? On January 16, 1930, Albert Fish was executed in Sing Sing's electric chair, his death closing a chapter that had horrified America. The 65-year-old killer, responsible for at least 15 murders and countless acts of molestation, went to his death, with a disturbing calm, reportedly smiling at the prospect of his final thrill. His execution was swift, but the impact of his crimes rippled far beyond the prison walls, forcing a nation to confront uncomfortable truths about mental illness, societal neglect, and the nature of evil. Fish wasn't just a killer, he was a mirror reflecting the failures of 1930s America. The immediate aftermath was a storm of grief and outrage. For families like the Budds, whose 10-year-old daughter Grace was Fish's most infamous victim, the execution offered no closure. Delia Budd, haunted by Fish's grotesque letter detailing Grace's fate, withdrew from public life, her health broken by grief. Billy Gaffney's mother, Elizabeth, learned of her 4-year-old son's murder. Through Fish's confessions, a wound deepened by years of uncertainty. These families, already struggling in the Great Depression's grip, were left to mourn in a society that sensationalized their pain. Newspapers like the New York Daily Mirror printed lurid headlines turning Fish into a boogeyman, dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire and Werewolf of Wisteria, amplifying the family's trauma. Fish's crimes exposed glaring societal flaws. The 1920s and 1930s were a time of economic despair, with overcrowded cities and underfunded police forces. Children from poor neighborhoods like Grace Budd and Billy Gaffney were easy prey, their disappearances often dismissed as runaways. Fish's ability to operate for decades highlighted the lack of coordination between police departments and the absence of forensic tools like DNA testing. His case prompted reforms, including better tracking of missing persons and early adoption of psychological profiling in the U.S. detective William King, who caught Fish, became an advocate for improved investigative methods, though he carried the case's emotional weight until his death. Culturally, Fish's story left an indelible mark. His crimes fueled the true crime genre, inspiring books, articles, and later films like The Gray Man. His nickname, the Brooklyn Vampire, became a cautionary tale whispered to children to avoid strangers. In New York, places like Wisteria Cottage, where Grace was killed, became urban legends avoided by locals who felt the lingering chill of Fish's presence. The case also sparks debates about mental illness and the death penalty. Fish's defense argued insanity, citing his childhood abuse at St. John's Orphanage and his religious delusions. Yet his calculated planning luring victims evading capture convinced many he was a monster, not a madman. This tension between madness and evil remains a point of fascination for criminologists. Psychologically, Fish's legacy is a case study in depravity. Modern experts like Dr. Catherine Ramsland describe him as a rare polymorphous perverse killer, driven by a constellation of paraphilias: sadism, masochism, pedophilia, and cannibalism. His childhood trauma coupled with untreated mental illness created a perfect storm. Fish's obsession with pain, seen in his self-inserted needles and ritualistic murders, was both a compulsion and a performance. His claim that divine voices sanctioned his acts suggests a delusional framework, but his ability to maintain a family and job points to a chilling lucidity. This duality, grandfather by day, monster by night, makes Fish a haunting figure in true crime history. One shocking detail lingered after his death: the needles. Prison X-rays revealed 29 needles embedded in Fish's pelvis, some so old they'd rusted, a testament to his decades-long masochistic rituals. This gruesome discovery, revealed only posthumously, underscored the depth of his obsession, a final twist that left even psychiatrists reeling. It wasn't just the murders. Fish's entire existence was a descent into a personal hell he inflicted on others. Fish's legacy endures in the questions it raises. How do monsters hide in plain sight? What societal failures enable their crimes? His story is a warning: evil doesn't always look the part, and ignoring the vulnerable invites tragedy. The Brooklyn Vampire's shadow reminds us that history hides horrors we must confront to protect the innocent. If this tale of terror shocked you, hit that subscribe button, like and share to spread these haunting stories with the world. Comment below. What do you think Fish's legacy teaches us about human nature? Your engagement helps Weird History Unveiled bring more dark history to light. Don't miss our next dive into the strangest corners of the past. Subscribe now. The Victims' Stories and a Society Shaken. What happens to the families left behind when a monster like Albert Fish tears their world apart? And how does a nation grapple with the realization that such evil walked its streets unnoticed? The Brooklyn Vampire's crimes didn't just end lives. They left a trail of broken families and forced America to confront its vulnerabilities. If this haunting exploration of loss and societal reckoning hooks you, smash that subscribe button, like this video, and share it to spread the tale of one of history's most chilling killers. Drop a comment. How would you cope with the loss caused by a predator? Like Fish, Albert Fish's execution in 1936 may have silenced his voice, but the echoes of his crimes reverberated through the lives of his victims' families and the society that failed them. His confirmed victims, Grace Budd, Billy Gaffney, Francis McDonnell, and others, were not just names in a courtroom. They were children with dreams stolen by a man who saw them as objects for his perverse rituals. The stories of these victims, often overshadowed by Fish's infamy, reveal the human cost of his depravity and the systemic failures that allowed him to thrive in 1920s and 1930s America. Grace Budd, the 10-year-old whose 1928 murder defined Fish's legacy, was a bright, trusting girl from a struggling Manhattan family. Her parents, Delia and Albert Sr., were immigrants scraping by in a tenement, hoping for a better future. When Fish, posing as Frank Howard, offered Edward Budd a job and took Grace to a supposed children's party, the family saw a glimmer of opportunity. Instead, Grace was taken to Wisteria Cottage, where she endured horrors unimaginable. The letter Fish sent 6 years later, detailing how he cooked and ate her, was a psychological wound that never healed. Delia Budd, once a vibrant mother, became a shell, rarely leaving her home. Albert Sr. channeled his grief into rage, attending Fish's trial to face the man who destroyed his family. Their story, splashed across tabloids, became a symbol of a society that failed its most vulnerable. Billy Gaffney, Porwa. 4-year-old abducted in 1927 from a Brooklyn tenement was another tragic loss. His mother Elizabeth, a single parent working long hours, had left Billy playing in a hallway when Fish lured him away with the promise of candy. Fish's confession, delivered with chilling detachment, described torturing and consuming the boy, disposing of his remains in a river. Elizabeth learned of her son's fate only after Fish's arrest, her grief compounded by years of hoping he was alive. She visited his empty grave, clutching a toy he'd loved, a scene that haunted neighbors who saw her pain. The Gaffney family's story, like the Budds, highlighted the era's neglect of poor communities, where missing children were often ignored. Francis McDonnell, a 12-year-old killed in 1934 on Staten Island, was another victim whose family bore the weight of Fish's cruelty. Francis was playing near his home when Fish approached, offering money for a chore. His body, found in a wooded area, bore the marks of Fish's signature mutilation. The McDonnell family, already strained by the Depression, was shattered. Francis's mother Anna became a vocal advocate for missing children, demanding better police response. But her pleas were largely ignored in a system overwhelmed by economic woes. These families, united by loss, were left to navigate their grief in a society more interested in sensationalizing Fish than supporting his victims. The societal impact of Fish's crimes was profound. The 1930s were a time of upheaval, with the Great Depression plunging millions into poverty. Fish exploited this chaos, targeting children from marginalized communities, orphans, immigrants, and the destitute, knowing their disappearances would draw little scrutiny. His ability to operate for decades exposed the lack of coordination between police departments and the absence of centralized missing persons records. The case spurred reforms, including the creation of early missing children protocols and increased use of psychological profiling. Detective William King's dogged pursuit of Fish became a model for future investigations, though he privately admitted the case left him haunted by the children he couldn't save. Culturally, Fish's crimes fed a growing fascination with true crime. His nicknames, Brooklyn Vampire, Gray Man, Werewolf of Wisteria, became shorthand for unimaginable evil, inspiring pulp magazines and later media. Places like Wisteria Cottage became local legends avoided by children who whispered of a cannibal's lair. The case also ignited debates about mental health. Fish's childhood abuse at St. John's Orphanage, his religious delusions, and his masochistic rituals. 29 needles found in his pelvis pointed to untreated mental illness. Yet his calculated planning suggested a chilling awareness, fueling arguments about whether he was mad or simply evil. Modern psychologists like Dr. Catherine Ramsland see Fish as a rare case of polymorphous perversity, where multiple paraphilias converged, amplified by a society that ignored early warning signs. Fish's legacy is a grim reminder of the cost of neglect. His victims were not just statistics, but children with families who loved them, erased by a predator who thrived in the shadows. The reforms his case sparked, better policing awareness of child safety, came too late for the Budds, Gaffneys, and McDonnells, but they shaped a safer future. Fish's story warns us that monsters don't always lurk in dark alleys. Sometimes, they're the quiet neighbor with a kind smile. What mysteries remain in the wake of his crimes? In the next part, we'll delve into the enduring questions and cultural myths that keep the Brooklyn Vampire alive. But first, let's hear from you. Comment below. What shocks you most about the families Fish left behind? Like and share to help us bring more dark history to light.